Baptism has been part of Christianity from the beginning. Nearly all Christian denominations practice it in one form or another. In this video, I want to look at the roots of baptism, how it evolved over the 2,000 years since the time of Jesus, and what it means for us today. The roots. Baptism goes back to the ritual washing prescribed in the Hebrew Scriptures. There we find all kinds of rules about washing after certain activities or before certain activities. The general idea in this type of washing has to do with purification. For example, if a person touches the corpse of an animal, that person and their clothes are considered unclean until they wash themselves and their clothes. As you can see, this type of washing had a practical function. But the same idea of clean and unclean applied in a spiritual sense. Before entering the temple in Jerusalem to offer sacrifices, one had to wash in a purpose-built pool called a mikvah. While there was certainly an aspect of becoming physically clean in this type of bath, the main point was more about preparation, preparing yourself inwardly and outwardly to enter into the sacred space and make your sacred offering before God. Another use for this kind of washing in a mikvah was when someone who was not born into Judaism decided to become Jewish. One of the several steps of this long conversion process was, and still is, to wash in a mikvah. When John the Baptist came along, he adapted this kind of symbolic spiritual washing by shifting it away from the temple, away from constructed mikvahs, and on to the eastern bank of the Jordan River. The Jordan River was understood to be the eastern border of the land of Israel. John seems to have been reaching back to the time described in the Hebrew Scriptures in the book of Joshua, when the people of Israel came to the end of their wilderness journey and entered the land that God had promised them. John was saying that the people needed to start over. They needed to go back into the wilderness and, quote-unquote, cross the waters again into the sacred land to make a new beginning. Jesus and the Apostles. Jesus took John's adaptation and further adapted it. Unlike John, Jesus himself never baptized anyone, but he did tell his disciples to baptize people. It's not clear from the context of the relevant passages in the Gospels what that baptism was meant to do, but it was definitely connected to proclaiming the good news of God's love and forgiveness, and expanding the circle of the community of faith to include those who had been marginalized in the society. After the events of Jesus' crucifixion, resurrection, appearances to his followers, and ascension to God, the disciples further adapted the baptism that Jesus had given them. And so, baptism came to mark the point of formal entry into the community of the followers of the Jesus way. 2,000 years of baptism. In the New Testament, the few examples we have where the details of a baptism are described for us show that it was a very simple matter. The classic example is in Acts 8:26-40, where the Apostle Philip meets an official from Ethiopia who is visiting Jerusalem. The official is in his carriage, reading the Scriptures. Philip sees him and asks if he understands what it says. The official asks back, "How can I understand if there is no one to instruct me?" So Philip gets in the carriage, sits down beside him, and begins to explain. When the carriage passes by a body of water, the official says, "Look, there's some water. What is to prevent me from being baptized?" They get out, and Philip baptizes him. Within 300 years, the picture was very different. Because of the on-again, off-again persecutions of the Christian community, they had to be cautious about who was welcomed in and how they became part of the inner workings of the community. A spy for the authorities could easily rat out the whole group which could mean arrest, torture, and even death for everyone. The preparation for baptism became a year-long process of instruction and of being paired with someone who would sponsor the candidate and journey with them through that time to get to know them and check them out, as it were. The baptism ceremony itself was often held in the wee hours of Easter Day, with many baptism candidates being baptized at the same time. The early morning hour was symbolic of rising to a new life in Christ at the hour when Jesus had risen from death. But it also had a practical purpose. There were no weekends or days off for the poor or for enslaved people. For them to be able to participate, these things had to happen when they didn't have to be at work. Those who were born into the Christian community were not expected to undergo all this scrutiny. Their parents were known, they were known. It was felt very early on that the children of the baptized should be baptized right away, because they would be receiving their instruction through the words and actions of their family. At the beginning of the 300s, the persecutions ended and everything changed again. The formality and symbolism was retained, but once Christianity became legal and, by the end of the 300s, became the official religion of the Roman Empire, the large numbers of people seeking baptism meant that the whole system had to be adapted and streamlined. The need for secrecy was gone. Instruction became shorter and more basic. The role of sponsors evolved into that of godparents. Eventually, the entire society was made up of baptized people. The next big change came at the time of the Reformation in the early 1500s. With the printing press and increased literacy, many people were beginning to read the Bible on their own. Without the knowledge of those early centuries, and going only by the biblical text, without historical context, some of them got the impression that baptism was only for adults. Others came to see it more as a personal decision and thought that their baptism as children didn't count. Some got the impression that the baptism had to be full immersion in water, and so what I call the baptism wars began. As the different denominations emerged out of the Reformation, one of the features that often defined one from another was how they practiced and understood baptism. Baptism at Oasis United Church. The modern creedal statement called Song of Faith from the United Church of Canada has this to say about baptism. We celebrate two sacraments as gifts of Christ, baptism and Holy Communion. In these sacraments, the ordinary things of life, water, bread, wine, point beyond themselves to God and God's love, teaching us to be alert to the sacred in the midst of life. Baptism is the means by which we are received at any age into the covenanted community of the Church. It is the ritual that signifies our rebirth in faith and our cleansing by the power of God. Baptism signifies the nurturing, sustaining, and transforming power of God's love and our grateful response to that grace. The word sacrament comes from the Romans. It means a sacred pledge. When we call baptism and communion sacraments, we are saying that in these actions, God is making a sacred pledge to us of that love and grace referred to in this creedal statement. Christianity's approach to baptism has taken many forms throughout history, and there are still a variety of ways that the different denominations approach baptism. Despite all the variation, some threads have carried through from ancient times, such as the flexible approach of the disciples, or the emphasis on baptizing at Easter from those next several centuries, or the emphasis on instruction. In the United Church of Canada context, The sacrament and ritual action of baptism is a celebration of the wide and inclusive circle of love that God continually invites us to enter into. It is a promise that we, as a community of faith, will embody that love, and it is a promise that we, as individuals, will receive and share the transformational love that Jesus brought into this world.